I was grabbing coffee with a friend last week. Let's call him Mark. For 2 years, Mark had been completely obsessed with this idea of quitting his soul-crushing corporate job to start his own design studio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, he had the savings, the business plan, a list of clients ready to go. He talked about it with this frantic, desperate energy, you know, like a man trapped underwater gasping for air.
I know that feeling.
So then the moment finally came. He submitted his resignation, and his boss actually offered him this incredibly graceful exit with a consulting retainer to keep him afloat. It was the perfect handoff.
The dream scenario.
The dream scenario. I expected him to be popping champagne, but when we met up, he looked devastated. He was just like nursing a cold espresso, staring blankly at the wall.
Oh, no.
He told me he was thinking about calling his boss to beg for his old job back.
You're kidding after all that.
He said, and his voice dropped to a whisper, I just realized I don't think I'm a business owner type of guy. What if I'm just a guy who's good at following orders? And he started citing these tiny, insignificant risk stuff he'd already accounted for months ago as if they were these insurmountable walls. The excitement was just gone, replaced by a raw physical sense of dread.
The biology kicked in.
It totally kicked in. He knew, logically, that staying in that cubicle was killing his spirit, yet here he was, desperately trying to crawl back into the cage. It was a chilling transformation to watch. 1 minute he was a visionary, and the next he was acting like an identity-protecting machine, terrified of the person he was about to become.
It's so counterintuitive.
It didn't make any sense. He had all the evidence that change was good, yet his nervous system was treating a career breakthrough like a terminal diagnosis. That moment with Mark, it just highlights this frustrating reality of the human condition. Your brain isn't actually built to make you better or happier.
Yeah.
It's built to keep you the same, because in the cold logic of evolution, the same means you're still alive. We like to think we're the captains of our souls, but more often than not, we're just passengers in a vehicle running on ancient, fear-based software that views your personal growth as a direct threat to your survival. Okay, so let's unpack this. We have this frustrating reality that when we're on the brink of a major positive breakthrough, our deepest instincts just pull us backward.
The biological function, not a personal failing.
Exactly. It's systemic, and that's why we've gone really deep into the source material here, looking at this phenomenon from 3 fascinating angles. First, the deep evolutionary roots of risk aversion, then the neurological structure of what you just called identity protection, and finally, the practical application of behavioral economics to sort of bypass the entire struggle.
Right. We're going beyond the simple, just be motivated advice.
We are moving way beyond simple motivation theories and into the actual wiring.
And what's so fascinating here is how all the sources really converge on this one idea. Resistance to change is not a personal failing. It's not a lack of character. It is a systemic function of ancient risk-minimizing hardware. And that hardware, frankly, it doesn't care about your abstract modern goals.
It couldn't care less.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really understand the operating manual for that hardware. And we're drawing specifically on a highly computational framework called the modular theory of consciousness, and crucially, the powerful science of choice architecture.
So our mission is to explore that fundamental conflict between our modern goals like career success, health, complex social status, and our prehistoric brains.
Right.
We want to detail the deep mechanisms of identity protection and then get into the practical strategies for automating positive change by working with our biology, not against it.
Exactly. To stop fighting your own system and start designing it from the ground up.
Let's start with the hard biology because it's the most foundational realization, I think. Your brain doesn't care about your New Year's resolutions.
Or one bit.
It cares about whether you survive the next 5 minutes, and it uses fear as its primary tool for ensuring compliance.
Precisely. The core concept here is that the brain's primary directive is risk minimization. It's about reducing uncertainty, which makes any kind of change inherently feel like danger.
And that's all rooted in what's called evolutionary mismatch.
It is. The moment you introduce novelty, you initiate the biological brake. It just slams on.
So if we look at that evolutionary imperative, why is stability survival? What was the advantage of defaulting to preservation rather than, say, optimization?
Well, the sources emphasize that from an evolutionary standpoint, staying the same was just statistically safer than experimenting.
It was a numbers game.
It was a pure numbers game. Natural selection is brutal. If you survived yesterday, repeating those actions is the highest probability path to surviving today. Therefore, the brain's main objective is risk minimization, not optimization.
So trying to find a better hunting spot, for instance?
Right. It might mean encountering a predator or running into a rival tribe. The potential benefits were often outweighed by the immediate, very high-cost risks. The system is designed to prefer the known path, even if it's suboptimal, simply because the outcome is predictable.
That makes perfect sense in a savanna environment, but how does that translate to that modern feeling of anxiety or dread your friend Mark felt?
Yeah.
It brings up the predictive brain model, like the free energy principle, which I think is a great way to visualize this problem.
It is. The predictive brain model, at its core, it posits that the brain is a prediction-generating machine. It's constantly maintaining an internal map of the world and generating predictions about incoming sensory data.
Okay.
And it is inherently motivated to minimize the difference between what it expects to happen and what actually happens. That difference is known as prediction error.
Can you give us a concrete analogy for prediction error? What does that feel like?
Sure. Think of your brain as a highly sophisticated satellite navigation system. It has a map, your internal model of the world, and it expects you to follow the route. Okay, when you introduce change, a new career, a new intense habit, or a radical shift in identity, you inherently introduce massive prediction error. The map is suddenly useless, or the terrain doesn't match the map.
The GPS is screaming, recalculating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the system registers this error as a threat signal, because if the map is wrong, survival is compromised. That threat signal is what we consciously experience as dread, anxiety, or that profound discomfort associated with growth. It's your nervous system pulling the emergency brake because the external world no longer matches the internal model.
So when I'm about to launch a new, scary project that I know will benefit me, that gut feeling of anxiety isn't a sign that the project is inherently flawed.
No.
It's merely a sign that my brain has detected high prediction error and is trying to pull me back to the safety of routine.
That's it, exactly. And this mechanism explains the comfort zone paradox beautifully. The brain prefers known suffering, the familiar discomfort of Mark's old, miserable corporate job over unknown outcomes.
Even if those outcomes are amazing.
Even if those outcomes promise massive improvement and freedom. The known suffering is a minimal prediction error, while the unknown success is a maximal prediction error.
Wow.
So the brain defaults to preservation, basically arguing, this state, however painful, has successfully kept you alive until now. Do not tamper with the formula.
And that's why people will desperately try to crawl back into a cage, even if that cage is soul-crushing.
Because it feels controllable and certain.
And this ancient software, optimized for certainty, it just runs headlong into the bizarre, high-stakes complexity of modern life, creating what we call evolutionary mismatch. Can you tell us more about what mismatch means in a neurological context?
Yeah, evolutionary mismatch occurs when a trait that evolved to be perfectly adaptive in the ancestral environment becomes maladaptive or problematic in our rapidly changed modern environment.
Right.
The sources suggest that many modern psychological challenges, they just arise from this disconnect. For example, traits that evolved to manage scarcity now lead to obesity in an environment of abundance.
Let's look at a specific example of this mismatch causing that profound resistance to growth. I recently came across the story of a software engineer in Seattle. Let's call him Elias.
Yep.
Elias is intellectually brilliant. He can navigate complex code, solve logic puzzles that would melt most people's brains. But he finds himself completely paralyzed when it comes to navigating the modern social landscape, particularly in competitive environments where he has to actively put himself forward.
The contrast in his behavior is striking, I bet.
It's exactly that. Elias spent his nights grinding in high-stakes competitive gaming, reaching top-tier ranks in these digital hierarchies where the risk of physical harm or true social repercussion is basically zero.
Right, it's safe.
Yet when he contemplated attending a local networking event, a social mixer, or even the highly competitive effort required to optimize his dating profile activities required to climb modern social status, he felt a visceral, heart-pounding dread.
The biological break.
I found his situation so revealing because it's a classic case of that biological break failing us in the 21st century. His brain, honed over millennia, interprets the risk of social rejection, the potential failure of optimizing a dating profile, or a public fumble at a social mixer as a catastrophic threat.
It's life or death to the ancient brain.
Why? Because in our ancestral past, social rejection or status loss meant being cast out of the tribe, which was a near certain death sentence.
And that is the core conflict. His biological hardware, optimized for survival in a small, tight-knit tribal environment where stability was paramount, is completely unprepared for the hyper-competitive, low-consequence but high-rejection modern social structures.
It's a total mismatch.
His system is triggering the maximal fear response, the prehistoric fear of being ostracized, for a relatively minor modern setback, like a bad conversation or a disappointing social outing.
So his high-stakes competitive gaming, where he excels, is low risk, precisely because the hierarchies are digital. He can fail thousands of times, list ranks, and immediately start over with no permanent social or physical consequence.
Right. Attempting social climbing in real life triggers that ancient, profound fear.
It's the difference between digital hierarchies and ancient biology. The prehistoric fear of being cast out of the tribe is still active in his neural system, and it's sabotaging his modern desires.
So Elias isn't lazy or unmotivated by choice.
Not at all. His biological resistance to status climbing in the modern social market causes him to instinctively cling to low-risk comfort zones. The brain is prioritizing the continuation of existence over the improvement of status.
And that realization is so foundational. Resistance to growth is often just a survival mechanism running on outdated software. So we know the brain prioritizes survival, it minimizes prediction error. The next layer we have to peel back is, how does the brain decide what information is important enough to remember and act upon?
Right.
How do we move from just basic survival instincts to having this rich, vivid, subjective experience of the world? The dread Mark felt, the paralysis Elias felt. This is where the modular consciousness theory, or MCT, offers a fascinating functional explanation. It suggests that subjective experience, the feeling of being conscious, is not some philosophical mystery.
No.
It's a graded, quantifiable, and functional signal designed precisely to prioritize information for memory and action.
Okay, that sounds highly technical. If we're trying to make this accessible for you listening, how does MCT conceptualize consciousness? Is it a single stream?
Well, MCT reframes consciousness computationally. It moves away from treating it as an endless, continuous stream. Instead, it's conceptualized as a discrete sequence of temporally bounded structured units. They're called integrated informational states, or ISs.
Okay.
Think of it like a movie reel. Instead of a fluid flow, the brain is processing reality in a series of extremely rapid, high-resolution frames, each one a holistic data packet.
A data packet or a frame, that makes sense. But what makes that specific frame feel like a conscious experience rather than just unconscious processing? That's the subjective part, what it's like feeling.
That's the subjectivity tag. Every single ISIS is tagged with an information density vector. We can imagine this vector as the ISIS's personal relevance score.
A relevance score.
The magnitude of this non-null vector is hypothesized to correlate directly with the intensity of felt subjectivity, the vividness, the emotional impact, or the sheer sense of personal relevance of that particular moment.
So if the vector is null,
the experience remains unconscious background processing. If it's non-null and has a high magnitude, you feel the profound impact, like the moment Mark submitted his resignation.
So subjectivity is a quantifiable signal, a density vector, that rates how important this frame of reality is to me right now. But what does that vector do functionally? Does it just make things feel intense, or does it actually drive long-term behavior?
Oh, it is entirely functional. A high-density vector is an internal command signal. It influences 3 crucial downstream processes. It profoundly biases memory encoding, ensuring the experience is robustly stored. It influences behavioral readiness by setting emotional baselines, and it prioritizes decision-making.
So states with strong subjective intensity.
They exert a far greater influence on immediate behavior and long-term memory encoding than neutral, logical data points.
That perfectly explains the power of emotional memory outspeeding logic. The time you messed up a presentation in front of 1,000 people, or the moment a relative passed away, those moments are tagged with such a high-density vector that they become instantly retrievable and emotionally potent decades later.
Exactly. Even if logically they hold little current relevance, the system is designed to remember the things that felt vivid and significant.
Okay.
Now, let's trace how a signal moves through the conscious cycle, which begins with the filtering process. The brain has far more sensory and cognitive input than it can consciously handle.
Right.
It must run a highly selective screening process via the filter module.
So consciousness is a resource we have to earn access to. What criteria are signals judged on?
Each incoming signal sensoromotor, emotional, mnemonic, is assigned a dynamic salient score. Only signals exceeding a context-sensitive threshold are selected for conscious access.
So it's like a bouncer at a club.
A very sophisticated bouncer
Yeah.
at a very exclusive club, yeah. Most data packets are denied entry. What's critical is how this threshold behaves. It rises in response to repetition, which is habituation. You stop noticing your apartment smell after 5 minutes. And it falls in response to novelty, uncertainty, or goal relevance. If you hear an unusual sound in your house, the threshold drops immediately, and that information is fast-tracked to conscious processing.
That sounds like another mechanism built to push us towards safety and efficiency. Predictable is safe and doesn't require conscious bandwidth, so the brain ignores it.
Right.
Novelty is uncertain, so the brain lowers the threshold to ensure we pay attention, even if that novelty is positive change.
Precisely. Once filtered and selected, the inputs are processed by specialized conscious modules, whose coordinated outputs form that structured data packet, the IC. The sources outline 4 core conscious modules.
Let's break down these core processing functions, starting with the highest level.
First, the abstraction module. This supports all high-level processing: logic, hierarchical thought, anticipation, and scenario simulation. It is the engine that runs what-if scenarios, allowing us to think about the future or ponder complex problems.
Interesting.
The sources even suggest that in the advanced configuration of consciousness, there's an existential submodule housed within abstraction, which deals with our biggest life questions, fears, and ultimate goals.
So when Mark was agonizing over whether he could handle being a business owner, that was his abstraction module running high-stakes simulations, probably fueled by negative inputs from the prediction error system.
Absolutely. The second module is the narration module. This is arguably the most critical for identity. Its function is to organize successive ICEs into temporally ordered sequences, creating the perception of a unified self and temporal continuity.
So the I that exists today is linked to the I that existed yesterday via this continuous flowing story.
Exactly. The apparent stability of the self in this model arises from the continuous function of the narrative module. Agency, identity, personal history, these are constructs required for coherence across informational units rather than intrinsic, unchanging entities.
Wow.
Mark struggling to quit his job was his narration module, trying to maintain a coherent, safe, and predictable story, even if the story was miserable. The new story, business owner Mark, was neurologically incoherent with the established employee Mark.
And the final modules deal with how we relate to that self and to others.
Yes, the evaluation and self-evaluation modules. These incorporate social emotions like guilt, pride, shame, empathy, and antipathy to support moral reasoning and selfhood.
Okay.
The self-evaluation module, specifically associated with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, is constantly monitoring how the individual's behavior aligns with the self-narrative and social expectations.
So when all those pieces, abstraction, narration, and evaluation are integrated, that's when we form that packaged, subjectively intense I's tagged with a high relevance score.
Correct. And the conclusion is that the brain is wired to enhance retention for emotionally significant moments. This architecture ensures we learn quickly from emotionally salient, autobiographically relevant content, a phenomenon known as flashbulb memory. The entire system prioritizes high-impact emotional data because, historically, that data was the most critical for survival.
That concept that the narration module creates the perception of a stable self that is prioritized based on emotional density moves us directly into why radical change is so terrifying.
Yeah.
Because if that narrative is the foundation of who you are, challenging it doesn't just feel like a bad career move, it feels like self-annihilation.
It is the deepest neurological hurdle. The brain functions fundamentally as an identity-protecting machine.
An identity-protecting machine.
Yeah. Embracing radical change requires overcoming a profound system-level resistance because a fundamental shift in the self-schema feels like a mortal threat to that narrative continuity. The brain equates loss of identity with death.
So how does this identity protection mechanism operate on a cognitive level?
It's through self-schema theory. The self-schema is the ingrained set of beliefs, filtered and reinforced by the MPFC, that dictates who I believe I am. Anything that threatens this core identity triggers acute resistance, even if the change promises massive growth. If your identity is the successful corporate executive, success in a design studio might actually feel threatening because it means abandoning the old protected self.
And what are the neurobiological components that enforce this identity bias?
The medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC, and the ventral striatum are key. The MPFC operates a psychological default mode that favors self-bias. meaning we allocate more attention and resources to self-relevant information.
Right.
This often manifests as self-enhancement biases. We tend to overrepresent positive traits about ourselves and minimize negative ones. This neural basis reinforces resistance to any new narrative that directly challenges the established positive self-view. It is why we rationalize our mistakes.
So the brain's default setting is essentially self-defense of the ego. It's easier to twist reality than to update the self-definition. And this struggle is particularly vivid when people try to make deep personal transitions.
Indeed. We see this when individuals attempt to transition from a deeply ingrained, socially conditioned identity to one that reflects a harsher, more objective reality.
I recall an interview with a person we'll also call Mark, but this Mark was focused on transitioning his social and personal approach after realizing his established beliefs about how the world works were, well, inaccurate.
Okay.
His struggle highlights this immense resistance. He had lived his entire young life adhering to a specific social contract identity. That hard work, politeness, and adherence to societal norms would automatically result in the rewards he desired.
The blue pill script, as it's sometimes called.
Exactly. When his objective reality consistently failed to mirror that socially conditioned identity, he faced a massive internal crisis.
I can imagine.
To accept objective, often unsettling truths about how status, attraction, or resources are distributed, truths governed by evolutionary and behavioral patterns rather than just good intentions, it felt like he was murdering his entire belief system.
And the person he thought he was.
Yes. His brain was fighting tooth and nail to keep the old self-identity alive because admitting he was wrong meant his entire past was built on a faulty premise.
That narrative highlights the depth of the struggle in navigating discrepant realities. Mark's conflict generates profound and overwhelming cognitive dissonance.
Right, that's psychological discomfort.
Exactly. It's the discomfort experienced when holding two conflicting beliefs or values, or when a belief conflicts with objective evidence. The brain is highly motivated to relieve this tension, and its primary tool for that relief is motivated reasoning.
Let's break down motivated reasoning, because Mark's attempt to cling to the old identity is a textbook example of the directional kind.
It is. Motivated reasoning, put simply, is using our intellectual power not to find truth, but to justify a pre-existing conclusion.
Okay.
There are two main categories. First, accuracy-oriented reasoning, where the motive is purely to arrive at a correct conclusion. This is slow, costly, and requires significant time and mental effort.
A hard work of logic.
It is. It involves quality cognitive processing, challenging assumptions, seeking disconfirming evidence. We engage in this when the personal stakes are low or when we are explicitly trained to think scientifically.
But often, the emotional stakes are high, and the brain takes the far easier and far more common path,
which is goal-oriented or directional reasoning. Here, the motivation is to arrive at a desired conclusion like maintaining Mark's old, comfortable self-belief.
Identity protection.
Right. This is achieved by systematically enhancing the accessibility of information consistent with that desire, while simultaneously suppressing or dismissing contradictory objective evidence. In Mark's case, his directional goal was maintaining the socially conditioned self-schema, overriding objective data that suggested the world operated differently.
What's truly alarming is the neurological basis of directional reasoning, especially how it involves emotion, which moves it far beyond just simple logical shortcuts.
Research demonstrates that goal-oriented reasoning is driven by affective processes or hot cognition, not just detached logical ones. This is the concept of affective contagion.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means a strong emotional stake in a conclusion, like the pride associated with one's identity or the shame associated with admitting failure, can infect the individual's reasoning pathways. When contradictory information is presented, the strong negative emotion dread, shame, fear reoccurs, which causes the brain to immediately reject the source of the emotion, further entrenching the original belief.
So the emotion associated with the belief acts like a defensive shield. It's not that I logically refute your evidence, it's that your evidence makes me feel fear or shame, and therefore my brain reflexively rejects your evidence to stop the negative feeling.
That is it, exactly. Neuroimaging studies have confirmed that motivated reasoning, when involving high emotional stakes, is qualitatively distinct from cold reasoning tasks. It shows less activity in purely logical processing centers. The system is prioritizing emotional regulation, maintaining comfort over cognitive accuracy.
And this can lead to things like the hostile media effect?
Yes, where consumers of opposing media sources find those sources biased against their worldview, even if they are neutral. simply because they challenge the established emotional identity.
And if we look at the extremes, this powerful neurological loop of identity protection and directional reasoning is central to how radicalization and extremism can take root.
Absolutely. Extremist ideologies offer a rigid, black and white framework that reduces prediction error and provides an instant, cohesive identity. Extremism can be viewed as an extreme form of identity formation.
Right.
Neurobiological insights show that these ideologies exploit sharp in-group, out-group distinctions. This dramatically increases amygdala responsiveness, the area related to fear and aggression, specifically toward out-group faces, reinforcing group bias and collective identity protection.
It's the ultimate defense mechanism, creating a safe, certain narrative in a complex world protected by emotional rigidity.
Furthermore, studies suggest reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, among those highly susceptible to extremist ideologies. This points to compromised cognitive control and an inability to easily integrate discrepant information.
So the system is just locked down.
It is. The MPFC's natural default mode is exploited, reinforcing a highly cohesive, if often distorted, self in context, the extremist in-group identity. The result is a highly inflexible cognitive state where the narrative of the self and the group are merged and protected at all costs, overriding objective reality in favor of self-preservation.
So whether you are Mark scared to quit a stable job or someone rigidly clinging to an ideology, the underlying engine is the same.
The same.
The brain's dedication to maintaining a coherent, predictable self-narrative, often by overriding objective reality using these emotional defense systems. We've established that resistance is biological, identity is precious, and willpower is emotionally outmatched and neurologically unreliable. We can't simply grit our teeth and fight the system. So what is the strategic solution for sustainable, positive change?
The answer lies entirely in behavioral economics and choice architecture. The core concept is shifting the battleground. Since willpower is a finite biological resource, sustainable change has to rely on engineering systems that reduce cognitive load, making positive habits the path of least resistance.
So we stop relying on daily heroism.
And start relying on sophisticated design.
Let's nail down the willpower problem first. Why is demanding discipline every day a guaranteed path to failure for the average person?
Well, neuroscience clearly shows that willpower draws heavily on executive function, which is managed primarily by the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
This resource is metabolically costly, relying on a steady glucose supply, and it is demonstrably finite. It depletes under predictable stressors, mental fatigue, hunger, emotional trauma, or requiring high-stakes, novel decision-making.
So if your plan for success requires you to make a heroic, difficult decision every morning,
like fighting the urge to hit snooze and forcing yourself into an unpleasant new routine, that plan is destined to fail the first day you're stressed, tired, or emotionally drained.
it's not a moral failure, it's a biological battery running on empty.
Exactly. And this links directly back to cognitive load theory. Change fails when it increases cognitive load because the brain has limited working memory. If a new routine requires you to make too many decisions, what should I eat? When should I exercise? Which task first? How do I start?
The system just collapses.
It collapses. The friction is too high, and the brain defaults to the established low-friction routine, which has a minimal cognitive load, even if it's the routine that's killing your spirit.
That brings us to the strategic solution. Choice architecture, a concept coined by researchers like Thaler and Sunstein. What does it mean to be a choice architect of your own life?
Choice architecture is the deliberate design of the environment in which choices are made, specifically to nudge individuals toward personally desirable behaviors. It's based on the robust finding that people are subject to predictable cognitive biases and decision errors due to bounded rationality.
So it's about making the good choice the easy choice.
That's the goal. What they termed libertarian paternalism, improving personal outcomes by minimizing negative biases without restricting genuine freedom of choice. You design the environment so the good choice, the one aligned with your high-level goals, is the easiest, most frictionless choice.
I find this fascinating because it moves the conversation away from the moralistic view of hustle culture and toward biological efficiency. Let's look at Julian's story, a young professional in London who had this exact realization.
Julian had spent months trying to willpower his way into becoming a high-value man, forcing himself to wake up early, forcing himself to go to the gym, forcing himself to initiate conversations.
The daily heroism we talked about.
Exactly. And by 3 o'clock every day, his biological battery was depleted, and he would spiral back into old, low-value habits because his executive function was just exhausted.
His breakthrough, as he described it, was pure systems design. He realized that relying on a finite biological battery willpower was fundamentally flawed. Instead of fighting his brain, he started automating his environment to reduce the cognitive load needed to execute his goals. He moved his apartment next door to the gym, so going wasn't a choice, it was merely stepping outside.
He removed the friction.
He preset his social calendar weeks in advance, so he didn't have to choose to be social, he just had to execute the appointment.
Julian's realization that the smartest people automate high-value traits is the operational manual for working with the finite nature of our biological hardware. He designed his life so that high-value traits became the path of least resistance.
He leveraged behavioral economics to minimize the cognitive effort.
That's it.
What are the key practical tools choice architects use to achieve this automation in everyday life, not just in public policy?
3 elements are particularly powerful for personal design. The first is defaults. A default is a pre-selected option that leverages the brain's tendency toward inertia and the status quo bias. People often stick with the default because actively changing it requires effort and introduces prediction error.
Give us a diverse example beyond the classic organ donation one.
Sure. Consider financial systems. Studies show that 401k enrollment skyrockets when new employees are automatically enrolled at a healthy savings rate and have to actively opt out versus having to actively opt in.
Right.
For personal design, if you want to start writing, make your writing software automatically open to a blank page every morning. That is the default. If you want to eat healthier, automatically default your meal kit subscription to vegetarian options. You leverage the brain's love of inertia.
That makes a ton of sense.
The second critical tool is reducing choice overload. Research has shown that presenting too many choices leads to a decrease in motivation, a higher probability of choosing nothing, and reduced satisfaction with the final choice. The famous jam study showed this perfectly.
When facing 30 different kinds of jam, I walk away empty-handed, or I feel bad about the choice I finally made. Why does this overwhelm the system?
It increases cognitive load dramatically. Each additional choice requires the PFC to weigh more potential outcomes, increasing prediction error and depleting the willpower battery.
So you limit the alternatives.
Choice architects minimize this by either limiting alternatives or providing decision support tools. If you're struggling with productivity, don't open 15 tabs of different articles to read. Use a structure that limits your reading to 3 articles per morning. By limiting the choice, the cognitive load of selecting one drops dramatically, reducing friction.
And finally, the third tool is partitioning options attributes.
Partitioning is changing how options or attributes are grouped to influence decisions. Humans tend to allocate scarce resources, including attention and mental effort, equally across categories presented to them.
How does that apply to designing my life?
If you are making a complex decision, like buying a new vehicle, you can nudge your own mind toward responsible choices. If you itemize practical attributes, gas mileage, safety ratings, maintenance cost, and list stylishness, speed, and brand prestige under a single aggregated category like aesthetics, you leverage the bias toward equal allocation of attention.
Ah, I see.
You force your brain to allocate a similar amount of mental resource to the entire aesthetics category as it does to the single attribute safety rating. By partitioning the relevant factors, you ensure your decision-making effort is allocated where you intend it to be.
Okay, choice architecture sets up the external environment and reduces friction, but how do we build the internal neural structures to support this new environment? We need the actual neurological shortcut that cements the behavior.
That shortcut is habit stacking. It's the ultimate neuroplasticity hack. It uses existing, established habits as treadmills for new ones, following the simple yet profound formula. After current habit, I will new habit.
This sounds straightforward, but why is it neurologically more effective than trying to start a habit cold? Why does the brain prefer this structure?
It's all about neurological efficiency and synaptic strengthening. When you stack a new behavior onto an established routine, you are leveraging neural pathways that are already strong. a process called neuroplasticity.
Okay.
When a habit is repeated, the neural circuits involved strengthen their connections, often through the accumulation of myelin sheaths, which act like insulation on an electrical wire, speeding up the signal. You are essentially using the existing, highly myelinated wiring of the established habit as a foundation, bypassing the struggle of initiating a completely new, isolated pathway.
So the trigger of the old habit, say pouring my morning coffee, is now already tied to the new activity, making the initiation automatic.
Precisely. The research on this is compelling. A neuroimaging study found that habit stacking reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the very region responsible for difficult executive decision-making and willpower, by up to 35% compared to isolated habit formation.
35% is huge.
It's massive. By automating the transition, you move the control of the behavior from the high-cost, easily depleted PFC to the automated, low-cost basal ganglia. This is how you free up massive mental bandwidth.
For the listener right now who wants to apply this immediately, what are the most effective implementation tips to start leveraging synaptic strengthening through stacking?
First, the source of stress, starting with tiny habits. If the desired behavior takes longer than 2 minutes, the friction is too high.
Right.
If you want to read more, the new habit isn't, I will read for 30 minutes. It should be, after I sit down with my coffee, I will read one single page of my book. The goal is repetition and initiation, not intensity. And the trigger habit must be absolutely consistent. Secondly, use the PREMAC principle, which is linking a less preferred activity to a highly preferred one. This acts as an immediate reward loop. For example, after I finish sending my difficult work emails, low preference, I will allow myself to watch the next 15 minutes of my favorite show, high preference.
And for individuals who struggle specifically with memory and task initiation, the people who forget the new habit even exists.
Habit stacking combined with environmental cues is particularly powerful because it reduces the need for constant memory. For instance, creating visual triggers is key, placing the physical reminder of the new habit at the location of the trigger habit.
Like putting your running shoes by the door.
Or, if you want to take a supplement, new habit, after brushing your teeth, current habit, place the bottle directly on top of your toothbrush. This removes the decision point and the memory requirement entirely. It turns the process into a reliable, low-friction system rather than a fragile choice based on willpower.
It's the ultimate realization that true growth is less about brute force desire and more about subtle, elegant, environmental, and neural engineering.
We started with Mark, paralyzed by the fear of becoming the successful person he always wanted to be. What we've learned is that his struggle wasn't moral or motivational. It was neurological. It was rooted in ancient hardware dedicated to stability and identity preservation. The solution is not to fight the biological impulse for stability, but to design an environment so sophisticated that the new, better identity is automatically supported by the low-friction systems you put in place.
It comes down to understanding that your brain resists change because it's a risk manager. It registers novel positive changes as prediction error and a threat to your narrative self.
Exactly.
But when you leverage its love for habit through synaptic strengthening and its finite capacity for decision-making by reducing cognitive load, you can stop demanding daily heroism from yourself and start restructuring your neural environment.
The focus shifts entirely.
It shifts entirely from exhausting willpower to elegant architecture.
The resistance you feel to positive change is a quantifiable, predictable, biological signal about risk and effort. True growth happens not through abstract desire, but through the structure, the defaults, and the repetition that intentionally rewires your brain, transforming abstract futures into embodied automatic behaviors.
So the final summary is this. Your struggle isn't a failure of discipline, it's a failure of system design. Once you understand that resistance is a biological signal, you stop fighting it and start building around it. Change doesn't happen in spite of your brain, it happens because you understand how your brain actually works.